everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Jen, a graphic designer and illustrator based out of the Midwest, and I run Bella and Sophia Creative Studio. This channel, The Freelance Life, is dedicated to sharing creative tutorials and a behind-the-scenes view of the work that I do as a creative freelancer, Etsy shop owner, and educator. This week, I'm bringing you a rundown of my top 10 tips for working in Affinity Designer. If you're looking for a more affordable yet formidable option to the Adobe suite, then Affinity is the software for you. Let's jump into the software and my tips. So what I want to do is highlight what I would say are 10 of my top tips for working in Affinity Designer. Once you kind of get used to the interface, and if you worked in other graphics programs in the past, you'll find that this interface is very, very similar. And I think that if you're comfortable in one kind of program, you may end up being very comfortable in Affinity as well. So what I want to do is just set up a simple artboard just to get us started. At the top, you'll see your main menu. On the left-hand sidebar, you'll see your tools. And on the right-hand side, you'll see all of your studios, things like your layers studio, transform studio, things like that. So what we're going to do is go into File, select New. We're just going to set up a basic 8.5 by 11 artboard. You'll see that you're able to adjust the type of measurements you use. So I'm going to change it from whatever it is right now. If you have it in pixels or millimeters, I'm just going to change it to inches just so that it's easy to see and understand how big our page is going to be. And I'm just going to create an 8.5 by 11 inch page. And I'm going to select Create Artboard, and I'm going to do that just to kind of highlight how you can add additional artboards into your workspace after you've already set up your file. I'm going to keep everything in RGB mode, but you can change your color format as well under the color formatting options here. You can update your bleed and margins. And then I'm going to keep our color format the same. You can see you can add margins or bleed. And underneath color, I'm actually going to select and check mark that transparent background. This is one of my top tips. To create a transparent background when you're adding images to your artboard, make sure you select transparent background when you're setting up your file so that you're able to export things as a PNG with transparency. So hit create, and this is the artboard. You'll know you'll have a transparent background because you'll see the gray and white grid. And basically, whatever shape you add that may be in color, for example, I'm just gonna add this ellipse here, the circle. If I were to export this, I could go into File, Export, and then I'd select PNG. That's gonna create a transparent background so that all you see is the outside part of that circle. So we'll do this really quickly. I'm gonna save it as a circle. I'm gonna save it to my desktop, hit save. And then I'm gonna go into my Finder, go to my desktop, and then I'm gonna find that file. I'm gonna right click it, and you'll see that it only shows the circle. It doesn't show the rest of the artboard, and you'll be able to actually place this as a transparent image on something else. So if I were to pull this back into this file here, I can just go File, Place, and then I'll find that circle PNG, and then I'm just gonna place it off to the side here. You'll see that there is no background, there's no white background. This is a great way, say if you are a digital planner or you're looking to create some sort of logo that has transparency, this is the way to do it. Another thing I like to do is work in artboards, so that's why I selected that add artboard. So what you can do is add additional artboards. So if I'm working in a file, sometimes I like to give myself different options. So you can select that whole artboard, you can Command C, or you can go into Edit and select Copy, Edit, Paste. And then making sure that whole entire artboard is selected, you'll see it outlined in blue. You can just drag that whole artboard over, and then you can work on the same concepts and then just kind of revise and update. I like working in artboards just because it makes things easier when I'm creating versions of something, whether it be a logo or a design concept, or say I'm creating digital stickers or I'm creating an actual sticker pack or something like that. I can create all of the different elements that I want and keep it in one file. It makes it so much easier to work with these artboards. I don't have to have a million files floating around in my folders. I just have one file with all of the different elements. It just makes it a lot easier. And also, just like layers, basically your artboards are your layers when you're working in Affinity Designer. What I like to do is update the names of these and organize everything. So pretty much whatever is on one artboard is going to be nested here on the right hand side within that artboard in your layers. So you'll see here I have two little arrows on the right hand side. If I click on one, drop down, you'll see the actual ellipse is selected that is on that artboard. Anything else that I add to this artboard will be added underneath it or on top of it within that layer. And then it's all grouped together. But just to make things a little bit easier, I like to kind of organize things. So I'll go into Artboard 1 and I can double click where it says Artboard 1 and I can update the name. So for example, maybe this is page 1 of my sticker set. So I can update it to be page 1. And then this next artboard, I'm going to double click where it says Artboard 1 and update it to say page 2. So it just helps to keep everything organized, and it allows me to kind of keep in mind where things are, especially when I'm exporting files or having to export slices of things, which we will talk about in a little bit. So the next thing I want to go over is the fact that in Affinity, you can work in different personas. So if you look at the very top menu where it says Affinity Designer, right underneath it next to your expand buttons and minimize buttons, you'll see 3 additional elements here, 3 icons. Your Affinity Designer icon, which is your designer persona. And then in the center here, you'll see something that looks like pixels. This is your pixel persona. And then the little export persona. What's nice is in Affinity programs, you can work in both vector and raster environments at the same time. I know, mind-blowing, if you select pixel persona, you'll have access to all of the pixel related functions. So pixel brushes, like paint brushes, tools, eraser tools, paint bucket, fill tools, things like that. Keep in mind when you are working in pixel persona, you are working in a raster based format. So your pixels and the size of your file will matter. Obviously you want to work bigger rather than smaller, because when you try to size something up, it does tend to get pixelated, but if you're working big enough, it's okay to resize it down. But what's nice is that you also have access to all of these additional pixel products, I guess. So if I select my paintbrush tool and I go into my brushes panel here on the right hand side, there's all kinds of different brushes that you can work with, texture brushes, watercolor brushes, gouaches, inks, things like that. So what I need to do is add a pixel layer in order to utilize the pixel brush. So I'm going to go into my layers options here up top. I'm going to scroll all the way down to new pixel layer, and then you'll be able to add these paint strokes within this pixel layer. And even if you don't add the layer, it'll create a new layer for you, a new pixel layer. Assistant will pop up and it'll tell you it added a new raster layer inside of the layer that you previously had, so that you're able to work with this pixel persona. That's working in the pixel persona. Then there is the export persona. And basically, I like using this when I have a lot of different elements that I need to export at one time, but that would take forever to do individually. So for example, I design stickers. And one of the types of products besides physical stickers that I make are these digital stickers. And oftentimes these digital stickers have lots of little elements on one page, and having to go in and export them one by one can be a pain in the butt. So what I like to do is utilize the export persona to basically export all of these different elements at one time using the slices function. So let me get some shapes on the artboard right now. So I'm just going down on the left hand side, down on my toolbar. There's all these different shape elements. If you click where I have the triangle, you may have something else pop up, but if you click and hold, you'll have all of these additional shapes that you can create. Like for example, this donut shape, and what's nice is you can go in and revise things. So if you click on any of these little additional elements here, like this little red dot, it'll increase or decrease the inside of your donut. And then you can also adjust if it's a whole shape or a segment. So I have a bunch of these little elements, right? And say I wanted to export them. I could go and export the entire file. So I could go to File, Export, and then I can share a PNG and then just select that area, which is page 2, and I could hit Export and save it. But the thing is that this is gonna save as a full sheet. So if we go into our desktop, we look at the sheet, it has all of them still on one file. Say I wanted each of these little shapes exported as PNGs, each of these on their own. What we would do is go into our export persona. So I'll select the export persona, and then I'll go to the left-hand side, and I'll click on that little black arrow, which is our slice selection tool, and I'm just gonna highlight everything on my page. So basically this highlights all of my shapes that I have, and you'll see them highlighted on the right hand side within our layers. And then I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna select create slice, which basically creates an individual element out of each of these little sections. And when I've created those slices, then I can go into that right hand layers here, and then instead of being on the layers panel, I'm gonna select the slices panel. And you'll see all of my elements are selected. And what I'll want to do is make sure I update my export preset to PNG or whatever you want it to be. Maybe you want it a JPEG. I don't want it to be a JPEG because I want to keep that transparency. I don't want to have that white background that you might see within the background of some of these. So for example, like the donut shape, if you exported this as a JPEG, you're gonna have a white outlined box and then white inside of the circle. So I just want it to be completely transparent so that I can layer these elements. So I'm gonna select a single PNG. You can select Retina, PNG. It just, you wanna keep in mind the overall size of your export. And then you can go up into your export options and you can change your file format here as well. I like to keep bilinear or bicubic just so that it's a higher quality element. And then make sure to uncheck mark include bleed. And then what I'll do is go back down to the slices area, and I'm gonna select export slices and then just uncheck mark anything that I don't want included. So for example, I have page 1 here. So I'm just gonna uncheck that. I don't want that to be exported when I export these, and I just want whatever is on this page 2, and you can just double check to make sure that everything is correct by looking at these layers here and then just kind of double checking by counting. So I have 9 elements here. I only want 9 elements exported. I don't want the background and all of them exported at the same time. I just want each of them individually. So those are all check marked, and then I can select export slices, and then you'll see in parentheses 9 is the number of slices that are being exported, so you know that the correct number is being exported. And then I'll hit export, and then what I like to do is just save it to a specific file so it's easier to find. I'm gonna hit export, and then what we'll do is go into that file and double check, and you'll see that each of these elements are then exported individually. Each of them its own file. So you see all of these slices exported. You'll see that they're each their own element, and we are good to go. All right, so now we can escape out of this export persona by just clicking on our designer persona, and it's gonna take us back to our artboards and our layers. So I'm gonna go back to page 1, this artboard 1 here, and I'm going to work with some of our vector elements here. So we have the pen tool. You create curves using line segments and Bezier curves and things like that by adjusting your points and the curves of that point. And you can adjust your width of your strokes, and you can change your stroke color as well. But what's nice is even though this is a separate file for something like, say, Adobe, you're still able to work in .eps format, and there is compatibility. So you can open and export file types that would be compatible with, say, something like Illustrator. So an EPS file is usually what you can do, what you can open, as well as like PDFs. But you can't open an Affinity Designer file in something like Illustrator. You'd have to export this file as a .eps or a .pdf to be able to open it in something like Illustrator. There's also a bunch of different vector shapes that you can utilize, and what's nice is that with these vector files you can increase and decrease them exponentially without losing any type of quality because it is a vector element. So you can zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, and it's not going to become pixelated because it is not a pixel item. And that's the beauty of working in vectors. What's also nice is that there's a lot of Boolean operations that you can work with. So say, for example, you wanted to create a shape with a different shape knocked out of it. So let's take this donut hole that I created, and let's layer it on top of this rectangle that I have here. What's nice is that there are these geometry options that you can utilize. So I'm going to select the donut. I'm going to select the square so that they're both selected together, and you can just double check to make sure that they're both selected by looking in your layers on the right hand side. And then I'm going to go into my layer options here up top, and I'm going to scroll down to geometry. You can add elements, subtract, intersect, divide, or merge curves. So I'm going to select subtract, and it's going to delete that donut shape from the rectangle shape to give me this new shape that I've created with that function. You can also add shapes together. So let's take this triangle here and say I want to kind of make this look like a house. So I'm going to select the black triangle here. I'm going to bump it up to the rectangle, and then I'm going to select the rectangle by holding shift, and I'll know everything is selected because it's all outlined in blue, or you can just take your arrow and drag over it. And then I'm going to go back into my layer options up here, go to geometry, and then I'm going to select add, and it'll add it to that shape. And the dominant color is what's going to be basically change that added shape. It's going to change that color to the most dominant color. So those are some really fantastic functions that I find are really, really helpful when I'm working with creating shapes and adding elements. And of course, the pen tool is very, very helpful, especially if you're working with some like logo design options and things like that. You can pull in your hand-drawn sketches and utilize your pen tool to outline things. So say this was a sketch. I'm just going to pull this asterisk sign. I'm going to select my pen tool. What's nice is that we can go in and I'm going to change it so that I have a stroke in my color options here. And then I'm going to go to my pen tool, and then you can just follow these shapes really easily using the pen tool. And then once you're done outlining, you can close the shape by clicking on your first point. And then we can go in and revise these elements. So with this new shape that we've created, we can adjust the curves by selecting our node tool. So we can convert any sharp curves. You'll see these new options kind of pop up here. You can convert your points to sharp, smooth, or smart curves. If we select smooth, it'll smooth out our curves. Or we can select all of our segments, and you'll know they're all selected because they'll have blue points. And we can go into these convert options, and we can change it to a curved element. We can change it to a smart option. And then if you select curved, it'll give you this really nice kind of like flower shape. And then you can select your node tools, and you can adjust each node manually. This can actually be really helpful if you're creating cut lines or die lines for like die cut stickers and things like that. It just gives you a lot of control over the overall shapes of your line. You can also adjust the mode for your pen mode, or for your pen tool. You can utilize just the regular pen mode, which just is going to give you your general kind of like shape building with segments. Or you can select something like smart mode, which will follow a curve. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to update the color of my stroke. I'm going to remove a fill, and I'm going to keep it at this 4.5 size marker, just so that it's easy to see. And then say I wanted to create like a curved shape. I'm just going to kind of curve things around as I'm working in a circle shape here, and it's just going to automatically curve these line segments for me. And then I can go in using that node tool to adjust and kind of like play around with the placement and the overall curve of each of these sections, and it makes things a lot easier working with these like smart tools. Now I want to talk a bit about clipping masks and layers. You can create clipping masks within this program similar to what you might be able to do within a raster-based program. So for example, say I have a shape like this circle. Maybe I'm uploading a profile image or something like that, and the requirement is that it's a round shape. I can actually clip into this specific shape. So there's Artboard 1, which is almost like your big main folder for all of your layers, and then underneath it's housing all the rest of the elements on that artboard as a separate layer. So what I'm going to do is place an image, and we can clip this into this layer. So let's go to File, Place, and then I'm just going to go to my downloads, select the most recent image that I have here, and then I'm going to click inside of my artboard and it will place it in. And then I'm going to hold Command on my Mac here. Command is going to keep my resize in proportion. So I'm just going to resize this down just a little bit. I'm going to pull in from the corners here. I'm going to move my image so that it's on top of the circle. And then I'm going to select it on my layers panel here. And then I'm going to drag that so that it goes underneath my circle. And then I'm going to drag it to the right so that it's kind of like nestled right within that ellipse. And it creates a new grouped layer here. And that basically creates our clipping mask. You can just hit Command Z to undo and it will release the layer. Within these layers as well, you have the option to utilize layer effects. So I'm just going to copy this flower that I made, and we're going to play around with it and see what we can do with it in terms of the different layer effects functions that we have. So if you go into your layers panel here, and if at any point you don't see the same kind of panels on your screen that I have, you can just go to your view option and then select Studio, and then just check mark whatever item you're trying to see, and then you can just drag it into your studios on this right hand side here. I'm going to select this flower. I'm going to go into my layers panel here, and I'm going to go down to the bottom, and you're going to see a little icon that looks like an F and an X. So these are your layers effects. If you click on them, you'll get this pop-up, and it allows you to do all kinds of different things like adding shadows, outer glow, inner glow, outlines, a color overlay, which is often very helpful. Let's click on the Gaussian blur. You can adjust your radius and it'll basically blur out your elements. This is a really helpful tool when you're adding kind of like something like rim light, or maybe you're doing a shadow effect that you want to have more control over rather than just using the layer effect shadows. Now let's unclick that. Let's go into the outer shadow. This is really nice too because you can adjust the radius, the opacity, the offset of it, the intensity, and it kind of gives it more of a 3D effect. And you could also adjust the angle, keeping in mind where your light is coming from. And then color overlay can be really helpful as well. Say you have a client that you're working with and they give you a logo, for example, and the logo is just a PNG and they don't have access to the editable file, and you need that logo, say it's in black and you need it in white or some other color. You can select the icon, the logo, as long as it's a PNG file. Select it, go into your FX file, select color overlay, and then you can update the color to whatever you want it to be that isn't the original color. Another really helpful tool that I like to use is the power duplicate. So for example, say I need to make a bunch of duplicates of this square shape. I'm going to select it and then I'm going to copy it. So power duplicate can be really helpful. What we can do is create multiple duplicates doing the same exact function every single time. So I'm going to select the square, hit Command C, and then Command V to paste it. And then I'm going to drag it over holding down Command still. And then I'm going to select Command J, and it will continue to copy and paste with the exact same kind of repetitive option that I've created that first round. Another thing that I like to use, and if you've taken any of my surface pattern design classes, you'll learn about this, but I like to utilize the bitmap fill tool. And yes, you can access this even in Affinity Designer. So I'm gonna create a wider rectangle here on page 2, and I'm gonna make sure it's selected. You'll see it's outlined in blue. And then I'm gonna select this fill tool, and once you click on this in the upper left hand side, you'll see you can change the different types of fills, and you just want to make sure that your context is fill so it doesn't give you a stroke, and then you can change your type from a solid color to a bitmap. And basically, if you've created any type of seamless pattern, you'll be able to fill the shape with that pattern. So I'm just going to go into my files here and find a pattern, and what you'll want to do is load the seamless PNG or PNG tile. That's what you want to load. And once you've placed it, you'll see the file just basically will repeat itself. You can adjust the size by increasing or decreasing by pulling on these little arms here. You could also adjust the extend. You could do a mirror, a repeat. I just have it as wrap for right now. Now we're getting down to the last few tips here. The next tip I want to look at has to do with type. What's really nice is you can add type really simply, but adding type is an easy function. What I like to do is highlight a unique way to add type. So say you wanted to add type on a specific curve. So let's take this circle here and say we wanted to add type going around this circle. So what you'll want to do is select your artistic text tool, and then depending on the shape that you want to write on, so for example, I want my text to go in a circle. I'll select the circle, and then using that artistic text tool, going inside of that circle, clicking on it, it's going to turn invisible, and you'll see that you get your cursor inside of this shape, and you'll be able to type on a curve. And then if you utilize these little arrow functions, it'll adjust the overall orientation of your curve, and if the type is on the inside or the outside. And then you can utilize this little arm here to kind of adjust your angle, and then you can select elements, you can resize them really easily. So that is how you type on a curve. And you could also resize and adjust the curve as well by adjusting the circle itself. The next thing I want to look at is color palettes really quickly. So if we go into our right hand side, right now we obviously have a pattern, but if we go into our color options and we click on swatches, it's actually really easy to add your own color palettes or to add colors in general to your swatches. So say you like the color in an image, you can utilize your color picker tool. And then zoom in, and you can just click on that image to get that color. And then to add to your current palette, you'll go into your color swatches here, and then you see this little icon with 3 squares and a plus. You'll click on that, and it'll add it to your color palette. You can also add a document palette. If you click on your little hamburger menu to bring up your pop out or your fly out options, you can select add document palette, and it's going to give you a fresh palette, and then you can just add colors to this palette. You can also rename this palette by clicking on that hamburger menu again and then selecting rename palette, and then you can just rename it to whatever you want it to be. So I'm just going to rename it new color palette and then hit OK. All right, now that is the last tip for this Affinity Designer overview, but really quickly I want to give you a bonus tip. Within Affinity, you have 3 pieces of software: Affinity Designer, Affinity Photo, and Affinity Publisher. So Affinity Designer is similar to something like Illustrator, Photo is similar to something like Photoshop, and Publisher is similar to something, say, like InDesign. I use all 3. I use all 3 on the desktop, but what I absolutely 100% love the most about this software is that with Affinity Designer and Affinity Photo, they both have iPad versions, and these are not just like watered down versions of the software. These are the full blown feature packed versions of these softwares in app format for the iPad. Anything that I'm able to do on my desktop, I'm able to do on my iPad. There's no subscription. You can buy it for $21. totally worth it. And obviously the software themselves, they're each $50 a piece, $150 for 3 pieces of software that I use professionally day in and day out without having to pay a subscription fee of $50 a month is just something that's really important to me as a small business owner and freelancer. And I know people will say, oh, you get what you pay for. When it comes to Affinity Designer, yes, 100% you get what you pay for. A high quality product that is competitive in terms of other softwares on the market. I'm a huge proponent for Affinity. I absolutely love it. I think the programs are fantastic, and the fact that I can work on the go using my iPad just makes it even better. And I have a bunch of tutorials that walk you through how to use the Affinity apps on the iPad here on YouTube, as well as on Skillshare. And if you don't have Skillshare or you don't like the subscription model for Skillshare, I'm on a platform called Arbington.com, and you can buy my classes individually. They're about $19.95 each, so $20 a piece, which I think is a great deal. And I'll leave all of that linked below. But that is it. That is it for this little rundown. I hope you found my list of tips helpful as you learn to navigate the Affinity Designer software. If you're interested in learning how to use the software, make sure you check out some of my other tutorials linked above. I also have some great courses that you can check out that take you through the software using project-based learning. I'll leave them all linked in the description box below. If you like this video, feel free to leave a like, and if you're not already, please take a moment to subscribe. I'd love to have you be a part of this creative community that I'm building. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!